Hey everyone, my name is Yarrow and you're listening to the DIY Small Business Podcast. Welcome back, happy Monday, happy almost full moon. I'm so glad you're here and I'm excited to share another interview with you today. So this time I spoke to Sophy Dale, who's a really wonderful messaging and writing coach and who also runs the community Creatively Connected on Mighty Networks that I'm a part of and really love. And interestingly, storytelling had already been on my mind a lot this year. I've been thinking about the stories we tell ourselves, the stories that we collectively hold about what's possible or what's desirable or what success could look like. And so it's been really cool to dive deeper into that and to better understand why creative writing as a regular practice can be so powerful for entrepreneurs and really anyone, but we specifically talked about writing in business, and that's been really cool. So if you are stuck with your About page right now, if you're not sure where your business is going, or if you feel like you want to be able to communicate what you're here to do and what your story is in a more powerful way, then I really hope you get some inspiration and insight and encouragement out of this episode. Just a couple of announcements from me. The first one is that on Wednesday, 2 days from today, I'm running a free workshop on business visions, which is going to be all about untangling ourselves from harmful ideas around scarcity and competition. And I hope that it's going to give you a framework or container to explore what success could look like for you this year, what you want to achieve and do with your business, how you can fight the overwhelm and really feel grounded and connected to your purpose. So yeah, the link to sign up for free is in the show notes. If you're listening to this later on, don't worry, still check out the link because I'm always offering workshops that you can sign up for under that same link. The other announcement that I want to make is that I have capacity for May and June for one-on-one work. So if you need a new or an updated work website, I would love to support you. Check out my site. You can learn more at yarrowdigital.com. And I also have space for retainer one-on-one support. So you can book 5, 10 or 20 hours to have me support you with things like social media strategy, branding and graphics and design, your overall vision and strategy, tech integrations, course launches or development, project management. And also just if you feel a bit lost in your business and you need someone to help you figure out what the next steps could be and what your technical and design and practical options are, I would really love to talk to you, and I will link to that in the show notes as well. Okay, thank you so much for listening, and I will send you off to listen to today's show now. Bye! Hey everyone, welcome back to the DIY Small Business Podcast. I'm really excited to share another interview with you today, and I'm speaking with Sophy Dale, who I met originally. I'm not sure in which online space it was now, but I remember immediately feeling like, this is a like-minded soul. Sophy has such a beautiful approach to coaching and supporting people, and especially to building community as well. She's running a network on Mighty Networks that I'm part of and really enjoy. And I'm just excited to speak to more people about the story of their business, because I remember that when I was in employment and dreaming about working for myself, I found it so hard to imagine what it could feel like and look like. So yeah, I want to bring you more of these conversations, and I'm really excited to speak to Sophy. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome. Can you tell us what you are doing in your business and where you live in the world?
Sure. So I work as a business coach mainly these days, and also a writing coach and mentor. And I live in Edinburgh, and work with people who are based all over the world, which I think is one of the most magical things about working online. So yes, do you want a little bit more detail about what I do, or?
Yeah, of course. Tell us more, because I think a business coach can mean so many different things, and I really, really love how you're approaching things and how you're working with people.
Sure. Well, because my background is working, I kind of dotted around being an employee and being a freelancer, but working in the arts and in publishing for about probably about 15 years or so. So when I first set up in business, it was as a freelance arts project manager. And I also did some freelance editorial work. And then I guess when I had my daughter, I realized I was going to have to work in a different way, because I had been working very much kind of on site with people, and needing to be in a certain place at a certain time. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden I needed a business that I could run completely from home. Mm-hmm. And it had to be something that could run in nap times. And I didn't know when nap times would be, because it was kind of constantly moving target. And so I changed my business quite completely at that point, and made it purely editorial and writing mentoring, and something that I could do kind of in my own time, and get back to clients, as I completed a piece of work, or as I had questions for them or whatever. And I also needed that business to be quite flexible, because I had so little time. So I worked with a whole group of, through my previous work, I knew lots of writers and editors and literary agents. So I brought them on, so that when I didn't have time to take on a particular piece of work, I would pass it on to one of them. And that worked fine for a few years when my daughter was a baby and a toddler. But I kind of got frustrated with, I guess just a bit burnt out with trying to help people to get published in the traditional publishing world, which was the main thing I was doing, because it's just increasingly hard to do that, because publishing has changed so much. And at the same time, I had found it really, really hard to get my head around how to market yourself online when I set up this completely online business, and all that kind of, the hype and the manipulative selling and all those things that I know that you also find just as frustrating. And so it took me quite a long time to find my own way. But having found my own way, I found that then people started asking me about, well, how had I done what I'd done? And I don't know if that's how you got started with the kind of coaching, mentoring side of your business, but for me it kind of just came out of people asking me. And so gradually over time, instead of being mostly an editor and writing mentor who was occasionally answering people's questions, I kind of morphed into being mostly a business mentor who still, I still do edit manuscripts, as in, novels and so on, every now and then, but it's not the main thing that I do anymore.
That's so beautiful to hear. Thank you so much for sharing. And by the way, I would love to edit sometimes as well. I'm not a native speaker, and I did some translation work in my 20s, but this is kind of like what I imagine to do in a few years' time, maybe when I feel like a change. So, but no, not to worry. Anyone who's into my web design at work at the moment, I'm not going anywhere with that for sure. But yeah, it's really nice to hear that your business has been growing out of a need in the first place, because I think sometimes we romanticize this idea that people, sit in their comfy chair one day and then they have this brilliant idea and they're like, yes, this is my purpose in life. And that's not to say that this isn't your purpose. It's clearly something that's super close to your heart and it feels super aligned with your purpose. But I think it's also really important to name that sometimes we create these things to meet our own needs, to work flexible in our own ways, to be at home with our families or our dogs or with ourselves. And so, yeah, I think that's really great to hear. And I can also really see how your background in writing is weaving into your work now. One of the things on your website that I really liked is that you're talking about building businesses that honor people's true nature and that give people breathing space. Can you maybe speak a little bit more to that, of what that means to you and how you see that in your clients?
So I think that the main thing that I do with my clients that I think is maybe a little bit different from what I see in terms of, other business coaches and so on, is that I think it's so important to get to the heart of what motivates us as individuals, to find our own purpose. And then, as you say, to see how you can weave that into, there's your purpose, but there's also your needs, and there's also what your audience needs as well. And really you have to find a way of kind of plaiting all of those strands together. But the thing that I find is central and is sometimes missing for people, or it's just not quite in focus for them, I think, more than actually being missing, is really having a sense of what your own story is and what it is that makes that story unique, and what that means for your business. Because I think your audience is similar to mine in the sense that it's mostly solopreneurs.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's very hard to separate yourself from your business.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also no reason to. You don't need to. That's one of the amazing things about being in business
Mm-hmm.
yourself, is that you don't have to have this. You know how people who work in corporate settings often have this kind of, it's almost like they put on a suit of armor when they go to work.
Yes.
And then they get to take that off in the evenings or at the weekends. But the rest of the time they have this kind of mask between themselves and
Mm-hmm.
the people they work with. And we don't have to do that at all as solopreneurs. But often I think people still feel some need to have a distance or a mask or some other kind of almost intermediary
Mm-hmm.
between themselves and how they present themselves. And sometimes that's a need for kind of, to look all perfectly curated on social media or whatever, or sometimes it's that they don't feel that their own lived experience is enough, and that they feel they should have more qualifications or, external rubber stamps to do what they really want to do.
Yeah.
So I think that the process that I go through with my clients, which is about kind of uncovering the stories that have brought them to where they are now, and then looking for the common threads and looking for how it all fits together. That generally what that does for people is just to give them that extra little bit of clarity, like it sharpens the focus for them, and suddenly they can see how the different strands fit together and how that makes them uniquely suited to run their business as opposed to somebody else's.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes so much sense to me. I don't necessarily do storytelling work with people, but I often have them write their about page, which I think can be a really deeply emotional process. And also,
I think it's kind of therapy, writing.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, totally. I would recommend anyone who's dreaming about running a business or building one day should write an about page now, just to see what that feels like and dream into it. And then the other piece that I sometimes do is to work with people on their social media strategy, because I think it can feel so intimidating and overwhelming, and many people come to me feeling like, who are they to talk about what they want to talk about, and what could they possibly add to the discussion of value, because there's so much out there already. And I always think that it comes back to telling your story and making people feel less alone in what they're dealing with. And I also always say that I think intimacy is so much more important than perfection, but it really takes courage to show up on Instagram or anywhere else and say, this is why I'm doing this, and sometimes it's hard, but I really believe in this and I want to share these tools, and this is what I have to offer. So yeah, I'm super glad that you're doing this work, and it's exciting to see that it's working for you. I think that's another really important piece to me. Every time I see someone who really genuinely does something that they believe in, there's a part of me that's like, yes, this is possible. That's great,
Absolutely.
Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit more about what that looks like when you're working with someone new, or perhaps you can maybe tell us about an approach or an exercise or some kind of tool that you're sometimes sharing with people when they come to you that you find is helpful in getting people to kind of step into their story in a deeper way.
Sure. Well, perhaps the easiest way is to give an example of a particular client who's given me permission to talk about her story. So,
great. That's great.
So this client, Teresa, is a website designer. So something to identify with, I'm sure.
Yes.
And so she's a Squarespace designer, and she was, when we first started working together, she was doing her design work as a side hustle. And she was just feeling overwhelmed about, how on earth, when there are hundreds of thousands of designers out there, how on earth do you kind of stand out? How do you show yourself to be different, excuse me, in any way? And what people often end up kind of feeling forced into is either they see somebody whose work they admire and they try to kind of emulate that, or they go for a kind of race to the bottom with the pricing. And she could see that she was kind of trapped between those two poles. So when we first started working together, I said, well, you know, my process is around storytelling and so on. So, you know, let's work with your story. And she was like, well, okay, I'm happy to try it, but, you know, I don't have an interesting story. And I've learned over time that the more often somebody protests that they don't have an interesting story, the more amazing their story turns out to be. And so in Teresa's case, she lives in the States now, but she came to the States as a 16-year-old. Her parents brought her over from Nigeria. They stayed with her for 3 days to get her settled. And then they went back to Nigeria, to the rest of her siblings. She's the oldest in the family. And it was down to her to make her way, get her education, and, you know, start becoming a breadwinner for the family. And, you know, that is just the most, I would find that overwhelming to do now in my 40s. You know, if you dropped me on a different continent and said, right, get on with it, you know, make a life for yourself. And by the way, the family's relying on you. You know, that it's just such a huge thing to have to live with. And so we talked about that story for a while and what that had meant to her and what she had learned from that experience. And obviously she'd learned to have huge resilience and persistence and so on. And all of those qualities are useful for her in her business. But actually the thing that came out as being almost the most important was, you know, she'd had this overwhelming sense of culture shock when she got to the States. And she has this huge empathy for her clients. The people that she likes working with the most are people who are really passionate about what they do. So they're often, you know, healers or counselors or therapists, things like that. And they're really good at what they do, but the kind of tech side of running a business is really overwhelming for them. And so her ideal client is somebody who's kind of culture shocked by having to deal with tech and websites and so on. And her empathy for them is kind of rooted in her experience, you know, her lived experience of her story. And so being able to talk that through made her kind of really understand who her ideal client was and how she could talk to that person as somebody who isn't overwhelmed by tech, but who does understand what it feels like to be utterly overwhelmed. And so that's, I guess I'm just kind of giving that as an example of somebody who didn't quite see how to differentiate themselves, didn't quite see what their niche was. And I kind of she had inklings around it. She sort of had a sense of it, but she couldn't quite bring it into focus. And getting to grips with her specific story just suddenly gave her that route in to see, oh, I see that, you know, this is what I bring. This is what's different in my approach. And I think that's the key to us, to understanding our story, is it helps us to understand our difference. And our difference is what, you know, lots of people don't need a web designer who particularly understands tech overwhelm, but some people do. And those people who do, they, you know, they're really relieved to find somebody who can hold their hand through the process.
Yeah. Thank you so much for telling that story. I find it really relatable. And also, I think it's such a beautiful example of how we can become relatable online. It's to, you know, it is really about, you know, finding your niche, and that makes total sense to me. It's really beautiful. And also, I think this aspect of storytelling really inspired me to remember how important it is to become a relatable person online, because you know, that there's so many people out there. We get so overwhelmed with all these folks that inspire us, but at the end of the day that we just kind of see for 2 seconds every day on Instagram or something. And I think those kind of stories, I mean, I haven't even ever met her. I haven't even seen her Instagram profile or her website or anything, but I'm like, yeah, that's a real human being with a story in the background. And I would love to hear more. So yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. Yeah.
Just, I guess one of my hobby horses is the way in which story evolved for us as human beings as a way of understanding other human beings and a way of understanding, like giving us access to experiences before we've had the chance to have those experiences ourselves. And so it's so powerful, and I really feel that people kind of skate over it and don't tap into it. And yet we're all, you know, even people who aren't, you know, not necessarily great readers and don't think of themselves as storytellers, you know, we all come home from work and tell people over the dinner table what happened that day, or, you know, tell tall tales in the pub, or, you know, everybody does tell stories. It is a skill that we all have. You just can't reach adulthood without having it. And yet we don't necessarily tap into it as much as we could.
Yeah, that's super true. You're also helping people with their web copy, aren't you? And I think that's really beautiful work. And I often see my clients struggle. This is usually the place where I kind of pick up. I ask people to think about the pages that they'll need and kind of what kind of information they want to have on each of them. And then I take that content and kind of make my magic with this. But it's a tricky place to get to in the first place. So yeah, what is your approach with that? How is that usually working when you're working with clients on that?
So we start with that same process of uncovering their stories first, because then once you have those stories, you can weave them into, because obviously there's all kind of information that you need to have, you know, on your Work With Me page or your services page or whatever. But that information is brought to life by weaving stories through it. And so it's kind of the same process. It's just the second step for me in that process is if somebody does want to go on and do a full kind of web copy package with me, then we still come at it from that same kind of story-centered process.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Another aspect of your business that I'm excited about is the community that you're creating on Mighty Networks. Can you tell us a bit more about the intention that you started that with and why you chose Mighty Networks, which I'm using as well, by the way, so I really love it. But I would love to hear from you how you came to choose that place and what it means to you now.
Well, I suppose the first thing to say is I didn't actually have an intention to set up a community to begin with. So what I originally intended to do was just to run a sort of pop-up 1-month community project, which was around freedom and what freedom really means in online business in particular. And that's really when you and I started to get to know each other better, was because I'd asked you to be one of the contributors to that project. And so running that project for a month and just having just a Facebook group for that project for that period really kind of brought home to me that I was missing, like, I love doing one-to-one work and I don't ever want to not do it because it does give you that kind of depth and I guess intimacy that working with somebody one-to-one that is hard to get in the same way in any other form. But I hadn't quite realized how much I was missing having also the community dimension. And so just having that experience over the month of all of those voices and people able to support one another was really, I just found it really exciting and inspiring. And on top of that, I suddenly saw that I'd been struggling for ages to find a way to make what I did more accessible price-wise, because one-to-one work, it just is quite intensive, like time intensive. And so it's hard to make your pricing fully accessible. And yet there's a whole pile of people who don't necessarily need that in-depth help, but they do need to feel held and supported and to be able to support one another. And that kind of group dynamic gives you something different from what you can get working one-to-one. And so just as the project was drawing to an end, it kind of dawned on me that I could just, have this be an extra strand of my business. And I was vaguely aware of Mighty Networks and have been part of a community that was run on it. And I wanted something that was fully outside of Facebook and the algorithms and all just that noise. I also needed something, unlike you, because you would be much more able to, I think, work with something that needed more kind of tech input at your end. But for me, I needed something that, would just roll out and I could I could work with it, but the framework was there. And being dealt with by somebody who knew what they were doing. I started it on Mighty Networks kind of as an experiment to see if it would work on that platform. And so far I'm really happy with it.
Me too. I really, really love it. And I'm trying to get more of my clients who run courses and communities excited about it too, because I think it's really beautiful to be in a space that's set up to be an intentional community. Using these words now, I think that has actually got different connotations, but I mean, like, a space that is really created to bring people together online, which feels like it's just no longer the case on Facebook. It's so busy and it's so hard to get people's attention there. So I think it's amazing to have your own little space. And I love the app that comes with that as well. Just also make things more accessible. I have my courses on there as well. So people can just open the app and take the courses on the train or while driving and listening. And so, yeah, that's really cool. Is there anything that you kind of would like to say to someone who's interested in starting their own business? Maybe something that you wish you had known sooner, or something that you would share as a resource to someone who's beginning to dream about their business?
I think what I wish I had known sooner was that you don't need to have it all figured out to begin with. And that actually it's more helpful to go into things with that kind of beta project vibe to it, that you can kind of co-create things with the first people that you work with, whether that's one-to-one or whether it's in small groups or whatever. And that's much more powerful for the people that you're working with. And it means that what you're doing will feel more relevant to them. It'll be more kind of targeted to exactly what they need. And so I think I had that tendency to feel that I had to go away into some kind of like ivory tower like space and polish something until it was perfect, and then I could bring it out into the world. And actually I think that's really self-defeating. And it's so much more helpful to work with people. Like when you first start out, work with people for free if you can, especially if you're starting something as a side hustle to begin with, and just give yourself that space to experiment in and find out what people actually need, and also find out what you personally actually love doing, which might not be quite what you think that's you'll love doing. And just allow yourself, if it's at all possible to do, continue to work full-time or part-time so that you keep the financial pressure off the business in the early days, and give it the kind of time and space to start to show what it can be, without forcing it. Because I do, I guess the metaphor of a business as a kind of gardening like process can be a bit overused, but you can't plant a seed and then keep shouting at it like grow, be a tree, and if it's not a tree immediately, you think you failed. It just doesn't work that way. It does need time, and the right conditions. And I think that I especially think most of my clients are women, and I think that there is a tendency towards perfectionism and a feeling that you need to have things all perfectly lined up before you can let them go into the world. And I certainly, for me, I think that really held me back to begin with.
Yes. And it's so beautiful to share that process and be transparent about that as well. I think, like I said, I really love being in the newsletter, and I loved kind of being part of the early days of that pop-up community and then seeing how things unfolded. And I never had the expectation or the desire to hear this perfect story of how you one day woke up and it was already there and perfectly formed. It's so beautiful to take people on that journey and say, I've planted the seed now, and this is what I'm going to do next, and I'm like allowing myself to experiment and play here. Let's see what happens. Let me know what you think. What would you want me to do, and so forth. So yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. Before we go, what are you currently offering and where can people find you?
So at the moment, I'm either working with people one-to-one doing the story power work, which is really what I was talking about earlier in terms of uncovering the story at the heart of your business, and the web copy work or just one-to-one mentoring with people. And then all of that can be found on my website, which is sophydale.com. And the other thing that I'm doing is running the community, as we were talking about. And the community, again, if you go to my website, there's a community tab on it, and that's the quickest way to get there. It's called Creatively Connected, and it's for creative entrepreneurs. And it's a mixture of writing support and business support, which again is something that's kind of evolved. Initially, I was thinking of it as just being business support, and it still has quite a strong dimension of that. But the writing support kind of crept in there, and so now it's both.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think writing is such an important part of being in business, because we're making so many micro decisions every day. And I think that the process of writing, even just for yourself, is so deeply helpful to be present with the options that we have and to get really clear on what it is that we want and to feel connected to our intuition as well.
Absolutely. I mean, when you were asking earlier about resources for people, I mean, at any stage in your business, I think if you can bring a habit of journaling daily into how you work, whether that's right at the beginning before you've even started, journaling can be a really great way to start kind of uncovering what it might be that you will do. But then, however experienced you are in business and however many other people you have to talk to in terms of, mentors and peers and colleagues and so on, the one voice that you want to be sure that you listen to every day is your own, and tuning into your own intuition. And I mean, one of the sort of prompts that I use when I'm journaling sometimes is just, what's really going on here? Because sometimes, especially if I feel a bit stuck, what I would say if you ask me is, well, I don't know why I'm stuck. Generally, you do know. Do you know what I mean? It's just slightly buried. And so even writing out for yourself the question, what's really going on here? Or what do I think is here under the surface? Yeah. It's amazing. It's just enough to unlock for you. And it's such a resource, and it's essentially free. And it doesn't have to take very much time. 10 minutes a day can make a huge difference in terms of just keeping you kind of in tune with yourself, and not letting your voice get drowned out by all the other voices that we're exposed to on social media and clients and colleagues and so on. It's not that those other voices are not helpful, because often they are really helpful, but you can't let them take precedence over your own voice. Yes, that is so true. Thank you for sharing that. I'm really glad we talked about that too, because I think that is such an important piece. Thank you. So we're going to add your links to the show notes as well, just in case anyone didn't catch this. And then people can check you out that way. Thank you so, so much for being here today. I really love talking to you. Oh, thank you very much for having me. Thank you.